Awesome. So we're going to get started. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. Today, we're going to be talking about the coronavirus and how it's really affecting everybody. And we're getting some perspectives from some pretty talented people from around the country. Their lives are about economic development, and they are in tune with their local communities, and they're in tune with the nation. And hopefully this will give us an opportunity to adapt. We try to always adopt our technology to help communities work with their businesses, because ultimately it's about job creation. And I think it's very important during these times to be well communicated with your businesses to help them through these trying times. They're going through the same difficulties you are in trying to figure out how to manage and run your cities. And today we have a varied list of guests. We have some companies that have joined us. We have some site locators that have joined us, and we have a lot of economic developers that have joined us. So we'd like to keep that perspective in tune with exactly what kind of information can help both parties. And I think businesses that are gleaning that information by listening to what the communities are talking about will be also very helpful. To do a little bit of housework first, this is going to be kind of the format. We have 4 special guests today that they'll have about 7 to 10 minutes to discuss each of their topics. And we'll try to keep that pretty on point, because what we want to do is give a good opportunity for Q&A. And over on the right, you'll see a chat box, and we want this presentation to be interactive. So we're going to do several surveys and polls during them. And each speaker will probably conduct one poll, or will ask for some comments in the chat box about what you are doing as a local community to help your businesses, or what are you seeing your businesses doing to help themselves. And so feel free to post your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will try to get to those after each of the guests have their opportunity to discuss their topics. If at any time during this time, if your bandwidth runs a little low or whatever, you might want to simply refresh your webinar browser, and it should clean it up, and you'll just be asked to resume the webinar and you'll come back in. For those that have asked, we've had a lot of requests. Is the session going to be recorded? Yes. And if you registered, it will automatically be sent to you within 24 hours of concluding the webinar. And it'll be just like a live link. We will also download it and upload it to YouTube, so that people can pause, go through the webinar, and get to certain sections that they like. So with that said, I first want to thank all the businesses. You guys are going through a lot of struggles. You guys are making it work. You're trying to figure out new things. From working at home to telecommuting to what we'll talk about. Linda will talk a little bit about pivoting your products and readopting them to make things happen during this COVID crisis. And to all the communities, it's been a challenge to figure out how to keep the cities going. With restaurants shutting down, there's been sales tax challenges that you're faced with. And some of these restaurants are really stepping up to the plate and figuring it out and helping the communities still thrive. And so it's a trying time, and I think everybody's doing what they can and to the best they can. And we hope that this webinar will help. But thank you for taking out the time today to join us for this webinar. So first of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Eric Kleinsorge. I am the CEO and chairman of GSLI, which is Global Site Location Industries. We also own a publication called Global Trade Magazine. We were formerly known, and most of us know as World Economic Development Alliance. We were founded 25 years ago, and in our 25th year, I decided to do a rebranding to communicate better with the companies, to let them know that we're here to help them in their expansion and relocation processes. And that's anything and everything we do on a daily basis. And some of the statistics in our 25 years are posted there on the screen. So we've put in a tremendous amount of work, and we had the opportunity to acquire Global Trade magazine 2 years ago, in which I love publications, but I really loved their web presence. And out of 2.5 billion index websites on the keyword global trade, which was a keyword we were after, they ranked number one. And that brings us a tremendous amount of visitors. And that's one thing we track very highly. Last month, we were up over 90,000 visitors for the month. And one of our stories that we posted has already gotten over 40,000 reads. So we're very excited about how people are consuming their content at these points. And it's been a blessing for us to have that as a product to help get the word out about our clients and to put them in connection with potential people that would either locate or use their services. I do a podcast. It's called Logistically Speaking. It's a lot of fun. We get to bring our clients on and talk with them about what they're doing in their communities, or if it's a company, what they're doing with their companies, and how they are handling their times, and bring perspectives to the listeners of what they can do to learn and glean information from them and help them run their businesses more efficiently. And we also launched something called GT Connect, and GT Connect is a free listing on globaltrademag.com, and it's meant to connect users with providers and give them an opportunity to connect with each other outside of us. When we have that many visitors come to the website, we don't want to be managing those requests. So with that said, our first speaker is Mike. Mike, I'm going to make sure that you're on air here. We've got a survey that's going to go up. Basically, we're going to ask for some comments in the chat box about what are some of the local initiatives your community is doing to help bridge local businesses and accept normal customers again. So as Mike's talking, it might bring some ideas to your mind of what you're seeing in your community, and that would be very helpful for you guys to post some of those comments. Mike, I'm going to pause the presentation so we can make sure that you're on. Mike, if you'll tap on, there's a little microphone button up at the top. It should bring you on. There you are.
All right, you got me?
Awesome. So Mike, I've known you for probably since day one of your tenure there at Dumas Economic Development. Mike is the executive director at Dumas. Dumas is in Texas. And Mike is one of those guys, I think, that thinks outside the box. He's very creative. If we put a project in front of him, he tries to figure out creative ways to make it make the most sense for them and remove any kind of red tape that would get in the way. And we've had some very successful projects with Mike. We've been excited about that. He's been a partner of ours since day one, but he's a real go-to guy. And Mike, why don't you give the listeners a little bit background about yourself?
Well, I've been in public service for most of my career. Started in law enforcement, and then went to the fire service. And I tell everybody I'm a recovering city manager, and now I do economic development. I've been in the public sector for between 25 and 30 years. Still enjoy it. I have my own business. My wife and I do here in Dumas. It's a garage door glass and light construction company. So we have that here as well. But enjoy living in Dumas. You know, we came from two different places. I grew up in Minnesota, and my wife grew up in Utah. And here we're in the flatlands of Texas, where you can watch your dog run away for 3 weeks. But we enjoy the people here. We enjoy the environment, and we enjoy the opportunities that we've had.
So Mike, you and I have been talking over the last couple of weeks about some of the innovative local initiatives that you guys have been trying to put together to help businesses either pre-sell their products or do some things to help them probably bridge through this this crisis into post-crisis, but help them keep going. Can you kind of talk a little bit about some of those initiatives you guys have come up with?
Well, early on when everything was really causing businesses to consider, closing their doors and start restaurants looking at doing takeout and typical things that other restaurants knew how to do, but some had no clue how to make it happen with the way their physical layout was. But so we went in and coached a few of them. But one of the initiatives that we first launched, we had several people in town that were just pushing this. Let's help our businesses out. They've helped us for so long. Now it's their turn to get some help. And so we had several folks that presented thoughts of donating money or doing whatever they could to keep our local businesses open. We partnered with Dumas Downtown. It's a local downtown program that the EDC helped get launched to revitalize that area. And the folks there, we put together a gift card program, essentially is what it was. And the idea being that the funds that were raised would go directly to the businesses for products and services that could be purchased now or later. Right off the bat, we were doing a matching deal. So in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but they raised just within a couple of days at $6,000. We matched it with $6,000. And we wanted to do something quick. And so we just did the gift certificates for as many of those local businesses, small mom and pops in town as we could. Those sold out within a couple of hours. That's how supportive the community was. And so we started doing another one where we would start selling more of those gift certificates. For example, my business, I think we had 2 or 3 people buy in anticipation of doing new windows or new glass later on when things kind of came back to normal. But the money was transferred over to the businesses immediately to help them out. And then the other program that we launched recently is Dumas Cares. And it's a local small business effort that where we were kind of restructuring our internal budget. I can talk about that some more later, but restructuring our internal budget and setting aside funds to be provided to local businesses as a small bridge to help with covering utilities, rent, or anything else that we could through this period. So people. Through Facebook, we had a local business man that kind of challenged the community to put money into it. And so we partnered again with the Dumas Downtown folks who are a 501c3. And so the program is basically a co-sponsored program funneled through that nonprofit in the event those that want to get a tax write-off on their donations. Before we even fully launched the program, we were kind of mentioning it on the social media here in town. There's a local COVID-19 social website or Facebook page that a lot of folks in the community, there's thousands of people that are already on that right now. So it was the quickest, easiest way for us to get the word out. Well, before we even launched the program, we had already had about $2,700 donated. And this gentleman in the community was kind of running around picking up checks. And while we were putting our program together, Dumas Cares, he reached out to us and asked if there was a way that we could administer this thing because it was getting bigger than what he thought he could handle. So we just adopted that into our Dumas Cares program and put the funds together. And there's a very short application because we have in Texas, there's an economic development sales tax law that communities under 20,000 have to go through a process on all incentives for any incentive value of 10,000 or more, and that requires 3 readings of a resolution with the city commission and public input, and so it's kind of a long, drawn-out process to move things along. We just said any of these grants that we're going to be or incentives that we're putting out would be under that $10,000 limit. It's a short application. We put together a committee. There's a couple of people from my board, a couple from a chamber board, a couple from the Dumas Downtown board, and then some business folks in town that'll kind of look at each of those applications as they come in, and we'll discuss the amount to provide to each of those businesses. We, right now, I think our budget for that program and pending next month's release of sales tax revenues for the EDC. We're at about a little over $50,000 to provide to some of these small businesses. The guidelines that we set up were these businesses would need to be small, locally owned businesses, no franchises, no corporately operated businesses. So we're talking help for all of these small mom and pops, whether they're restaurants or, beauty salons or, any nail salons, things of that nature that, a lot of these folks that just immediately had to shut their doors. We got a bowling alley and a movie theater were the first two businesses that had to close their doors because of the guidelines that were posed for COVID-19. And so we knew that all of them were definitely struggling. So these funds will go out as quick as possible. As they come in, we'll try to get them turned around. We'll do all the tracking and administering of the program through the EDC. And so that's just avoiding that long process, but really it's just a gesture from the community to our local businesses that tell them how much they mean to us and that we're doing anything and everything that we can to support them. And then obviously in real time, we're just pushing people for those businesses that are still open for folks to just to do whatever they can to do their takeout from the restaurants and curbside pickups and all of that, just to try to generate some income for these folks.
Yeah, and speaking of that too, Mike, you're kind of unique in that you're also a business owner. So you have your own business and you also help run the community. What would you say that from a business's perspective, what do they want to hear from their community, or what kind of help are they looking for mainly?
Well, I think from the business perspective, I think what they're hoping, I'll back up a little bit. I think there's a misconception with a lot of businesses when times are good and whatnot, that when they look at the economic development groups in every community, I think the assumption is that every one of them, or us specifically, are flush with cash, and that we're here when problems happen, we can jump in and give them a big chunk of money, and that's just not the case. I mean, we've got a tight budget internally ourselves, but next to that is just the businesses are just really, really hoping that their community is supportive enough that they will do whatever they can to keep them operating, or to help them when they come back. I think there's a concern, with a lot of businesses, can I make it through this and can I come back? We know the SBA programs, the federal programs that are out there, and they're moving at a snail's pace, as typical. So there's an unknown as when am I going to get these funds for payroll protection to cover this time where I'm not making enough money. We're operating in the negative because first and foremost, as a business owner, my first loyalty is to my staff. I don't want to lose them, and if I've got to lose them, I want to ensure that I can get them back quickly. And so I've been very open about my finances with my staff from the beginning, and just letting them know that I'm going to do anything and everything I can to keep them working, so they have that paycheck. Because I would say at my business, the majority of the workers, they're two-income families, and their spouse has been laid off or furloughed, and they're the only paycheck that's coming in, and so that weighs heavily on me. So I just think that most businesses are just looking to the community. What is there something there that you can do to help me out, and what is it? And they're hoping that the community will take that and run with it, and that's what we're trying to do. Whatever little bit we can do to help, we're trying to do and put together for them.
That's great. So in terms of to wrap up your discussions, adjusting budgets. Obviously, you have to pre-plan for maybe less sales tax revenues and drops, and finding different financial assistance or revenues that you can generate. Talk about some of the ways that you have worked on adjusting those budgets and projections.
Well, I guess if I had to give some advice, first and foremost, I'd say get on a new budget. The budget that we started with at the beginning of the fiscal year no longer works. So I worked on our new budget for a couple of days, anticipating a dramatic decrease in sales tax receipts, and that's how we're funded, is through a 1/4-cent sales tax generated. And so I'm sure everyone is in a different financial situation, and some economic developments are sitting on more funds than we have, and the sudden loss of revenues can make people squirrely, especially local mayors and their accountants. So if you're sitting flush with cash in your economic development group, my recommendation is, having that war chest. It's at the EDC. It's very tempting to use for paying for other depreciating assets in a community, and a city's going to look at that and say, well, here's how we can fund our streets and parks and manpower issues right now through this trouble. Let's just hit up the EDC for all these funds. And so if you've got the funds, pledge them now towards your local COVID-19 business assistance efforts. And then if you don't have a lot of money sitting back, I'd say work the budget as if your only current need is to operate for 3 months with very little coming in. So I went through our local list of businesses and sales tax providers and separated out the businesses that are barely operating or have already closed down. And then I selected all the largest ones that are still operational and bringing in revenue. So for example, you look at Walmart or the grocery stores or convenience stores are larger sales tax generating businesses. I just calculated a 30% decrease from those large payers. And then I just subtracted out the non-payers for the next 3 months. And so really, my new updated budget reflects a 40% decrease in monthly sales tax revenues on average over the next few months. So specifically, we received sales tax revenues in April that are collections that came in February. So I've got to look back at those. And so in March is when our businesses took the initial hit. So the projected decrease in sales at that time is, for our purposes, was 25%, followed by April sales of 35, May of 45, and so on. And then we anticipate a recovery coming back. Our fiscal year ends September 30th. So we'll maintain August and September at 25 and 15% respectively. So I use those numbers for the last 6 months of my fiscal year to see what I've got for funds. And then you got to prioritize, and I prioritize the basic needs of the EDC over any other priorities. And so, and I know you don't like to hear this, Eric, but marketing and advertising is cut out. There's no need for us to market and advertise outside the community for any purpose right now, because we've got enough to worry about with our existing business. So it's all focused on retention efforts. And so we take a lot of those budgeted items that are in there and remove those. And that helps us free up some capital to work, to keep things open, to keep my staff hired, and to utilize towards local initiatives to keep our small businesses going. So, yeah,
no, that's great. Yeah, and Mike, thank you for that. And there's a lot of great conversations going on there. I see Paul Sedania from California and Gary Dovey out in Pennsylvania. They're throwing up some really good suggestions, and there's some conversations on the side. Let you guys know we will download all of these, and we'll try to put together a document to send out to everybody at the end with some ideas and answers. So we might reach out to you guys individually. So Mike, thank you so much. We always appreciate you, and you're doing a great job there. So I'm going to go to our next guest. Let me bring Linda on. Linda? Linda?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Linda, we've got you live now. And today, want to introduce you kind of to our listeners. Linda Demario, she is the Executive VP of the Greater Irvine Chamber. Linda is a very dynamic individual I've gotten to know very well over the last couple of years. We've done several podcasts together talking about a big focus on exports. She's won a Presidential E-Award for export assistance with their community, but she brings a pretty large pedigree with her. And I've always enjoyed talking with you, Linda, and you've always been a wealth of information for our listeners. I want you to start by giving kind of a little background about yourself, and then we'll dive right in.
Thank you, Eric. With that introduction, now I have a reputation to live up to or live down, one or the other. Anyway, good morning, everyone. Just briefly, I have been in the economic development industry for about 40 years now. Specifically, that includes tourism destination management, as well as very straightforward business attraction, retention, workforce development, and foreign direct investment work. With the Greater Irvine Chamber, I have had the privilege and luxury of being able to expand a great many of our business retention, business attraction programs, and focus on foreign direct investment, and also further help our companies to develop exporting strategies as a market share enhancement. So generally, that's just the quick background.
Yeah, so one of the topics that you shared with me the other day when we were just exploring what communities, kind of a larger community in size and kind of right there in the heart of Southern California, you were talking about disruption for exporters and some of the problems they're faced with and how you're having to help them deal with those. Can you share some of those with us?
Certainly. Obviously, this crept up on all of us, and so it's not that anyone had any notice that this was occurring. So some of the more obvious disruptions were literally exporters ready to push product out of their manufacturing facility and finding the transportation unavailable, literally almost overnight unavailable, or at least in some suspension. So that was one of the issues that we were managing through, into talking with the transportation companies and helping to identify which ones were still operating and which ones were curtailing operation. But we also had the situations with the ports, whether it was the airports or the water ports, where everyone was caught somewhat unawares by this sort of creeping fog. And the workers had to be accommodated in a certain way, and they were unprepared with the equipment that they needed. And I know, because I live in Long Beach, California, I can attest to the fact that there was a backup of at least 20 cargo ships coming into the port. All of it was suspended, so that meant imports coming in were suspended, but it also meant that really backed up all of the exporting channels that would normally occur at the water ports. And then we all know what happened to the cargo outlets at the airports. So those are the disruptions as well. And then there were little things like the companies would come to you to complete and validate their documents, their certificates of origin and certificates of free sale. And we have always enjoyed doing that in person. And quite frankly, we find it to be more comfortable doing it in person because it is a legal document. We are certifying something. Interestingly enough, we were in the process of exploring an online alternative to the in-person certification process. I'm glad we were exploring it because we were able then to pivot and make that transition. But in the meantime, we set outside our door a box with instructions, and we communicated with all of our exporters, about 349 of them, I believe, and let them know that here's how we were going to operate until further notice. And so everyone cooperated in dropping their documents out and then returning the next day. But then when we made the decision to work remotely, we had to pivot again, and that's where we explored the electronic version, which is now up and running at the chamber. But across the country, these certificates were essentially suspended or delayed in some way. So there are several different waves of implications for exporters, and they were all, as I said, pretty desperate for a while. But they have, because most of them are very accustomed to this, they adjusted relatively quickly to finding new modes of transportation and dealing with the intermodal, as well as the disruption of their supply chains, which is global.
Yeah, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the innovative business recovery strategies, especially from a larger city perspective of what you guys have been doing and implementing there?
Yeah, I think in addition to the work with the exporters, We really undertook a very aggressive program early on, and that was to target the two biggest sectors in the Irvine Orange County economy, which is broad spectrum life science companies, everything from medical device to pharma, and the technology sectors, everything from soft to the hardware. And we wanted to communicate with them immediately and sooner because we needed them to be our barometer for what was likely to happen as a ripple effect, as a consequence of this, again, creeping fog and shutdown over a period of days, weeks, and months. So reaching out to them, that was approximately 1,500 companies that we contacted either by phone or email to sort of take their pulse. And through that, we discovered that many of them were making the decision to pivot very quickly to assist in this process. For example, Masimo, which is a medical device company, just completely pivoted and concentrated on ventilators and home monitoring systems, for example. And BioAmerica, for example, is in the thick of it for an antibodies test. So and I could go on, but all of these companies pivoted fairly quickly. Certainly part of it was through opportunity, but much of it is through recognizing that there was help that was needed. So I'm very proud of that, and also proud of our universities. University of California, Irvine, it has an amazing medical center. And again, they just jumped on this immediately. They're very much in the thick of working on a vaccine, as well as the antibody test, as well as Chapman and a couple other colleges and universities in the area. So everyone pivoted fairly quickly from the life science sector, as you might expect. And then we found that also with the technology sector as well. So that being said, then the city of Irvine and the chamber decided we have to take this wider. We have to talk to businesses that have one person, 5 people, 50 people, or 500 people. So we set out to communicate with all 20,000 businesses in Irvine. We did that through a combination of special edition newsletters using the business license list. We followed those newsletters with very specific information on how those companies could access SBA resources and the programs as they rolled out. And we began to take a series of surveys so that the companies could alert us to what they particularly needed. And then when we called or contacted them by email, we would know exactly how to respond to them most impactfully. That has been an amazing exercise. And there's 4 people at the city doing it. There's 4 people in our chamber that are doing it day in and day out. And over the last 2.5 weeks, we've contacted over 12,000 businesses. Now, having said that, my city colleague and I have become SBA program experts. And we are very grateful to our great partners with the SBA because they are treating us like extensions of their team. And we sit in on 2 daily briefings from the SBA, and they keep us posted and give us early heads up about changes that might be coming, and also helping us develop lists of banks which are accepting new customers, which is the biggest problem that small to medium companies are experiencing right now. Access to the PPP loans through a bank that will accept new customers when their bank is closing them out. So it's been an amazing exercise, and I will tell you, through those surveys and special edition newsletters, we were also able to persuade the SBA to do a special edition webinar just for Irvine companies. We had over 350 people on that webinar, and then in our second round of follow-up calls now, these people are appreciative and grateful for the fact that someone is listening to them and that someone is actually able to help them in real time complete their forms and access these loans.
That's great. Yeah, and there's a lot of good comments here in our chat box. Scott Corbett, in terms of pivoting, he was talking about some of the local colleges using their 3D printers and donating masks or face shields to first responders and hospitals. Karen Pollard mentioned that one of their distilleries is now producing hand sanitizer. And I've heard, and one of the real success stories that was in the news, Tito's had done the same thing, and they branded a hand sanitizer called Tito's. So it's kind of also a double win for them because they got to brand on something very positive that they were helping the community with. We've also got...
Yeah, there are a lot of really, really terrific stories across the country, like the ones that you're mentioning, where, as I said, companies made the decision to pivot. Certainly, there's an opportunity there, but most importantly, I think they were motivated by the fact that we're all facing this, and the more that we climb aboard and help one another, the sooner we're going to be able to manage and mitigate through this.
Yeah, a really cool one here. Gary Dovey, he was talking about how companies in the oil and gas industry are now pivoting and working in hospital and medical facilities, making items for them using their technology.
Yes, we have a lot of that going on in Irvine, Orange County as well.
That's awesome. So good. Linda, I want to thank you. Everybody obviously has been reading our survey and putting in some great comments. If you have any other good examples of those, we'll get those out to share with the communities. I'm going to put you on hold.
Eric?
Yes.
Eric, before you put me on hold, can I just say one thing?
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Everyone will agree with?
Absolutely.
Because I tend to be something of an emergency recovery expert, as Jeff and the IEDC have sent me out a half dozen times or so. But I think the astonishing thing that this has revealed, if you have not already become aware of it, the number of companies, small, medium, and quite frankly large, that are completely, utterly unprepared for this kind of disruption, or quite frankly, a natural catastrophe like an earthquake, tornado, hurricane, or what have you. They literally do not have a plan B. And I've experienced this most of my career, but this is where I think it just reveals this incredible vulnerability. And economic development experts, like all the people listening, are really going to have to help these companies, small, medium, and large, understand how imperative and essential it is to prepare for the unimaginable. Thank you, Eric.
That's great advice. So awesome, Linda. I'm going to put you on hold. So when we get to our Q&A, if people have questions, you'll be able to also answer them. So thank you very much for your time today. And we'll have you back in just a minute. Our next guest is Charlie Walker, and Charlie comes to us from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. And I've known Charlie now, we're going on 20 plus years. I've known the organizations that he's helped and worked for. I've done FAM tours with Charlie and got to really meet some innovative people during those FAM tours, and even got to tour a brewery up there, and maybe they're making hand sanitizer also. But Charlie, welcome aboard, and why don't you give the listeners a little bit background about your extensive service in the economic development industry?
Well, first of all, Eric, thanks for inviting me. I am Charlie Walker, President and CEO of the Diligent Group that manages economic development organizations, the Chippewa Valley Economic Development Foundation. So we do a lot of work in the area of business retention, business attraction, site selection for our clients in the Chippewa Valley. And to answer your question, yes, Mining Kugels, everybody knows that great beer brew, Chippewa Falls, is partnering with Chippewa Distillery, and it has put out some hand sanitizers, and that's been a great partnership in seeing how the business communities are working together to solve this crisis. So I wanted to just get right into it, and I hope we can save a lot for some questions.
Yeah, that's great. And Charlie, one of the things that you talked about, the first thing that you brought up to me was business attraction. It can't just stop. And you've had projects that you're working on, big projects, that are stuck right there in the middle, right when this crisis hit, and whether or not those are permits or getting crews together to keep the process going through. Talk a little bit about those challenges that you've seen come up that you didn't foresee and how you guys are handling them.
Well, good question. Mike had talked about putting all the resources in business retention, and we agree with that. Existing businesses is to help. They're so important. But we had some projects that are in the pipeline. What do we do with those? How do we solve them? Where are they? Are they going to be completed? So how are we going to re-engage those projects? How are we going to re-engage those site collectors? How are we going to help them recover? How are we going to help them retool? So one of the first things that I would recommend is just have a communication with those RFIs that you responded in the last 6 months. Pick up the phone, give them a call, let them know that you understand that the crisis is there, but we're here to help. The second, what we found through talking and having those conversations, we found that the earliest stage projects that are looking for expansions have been delayed between 3 to 6 months. So there isn't a lot from the Normanton surveys that we talked to our folks, the projects being canceled. They're being delayed and they're being kicked down the road. So it's very important for economic developers to make sure that we stay re-engaged with those prospects. Life is going to get back to normal. It's going to have some different twists. It's going to be a great opportunity. It might even bring that community higher onto the short list because of what's going on. And we need to think that. So in my case, I've got 3 projects that are in, we would say one's in the mid-range and one is in the completion stage. And that's in the development agreement, incentive negotiations. And we all know when you're in the incentive negotiations, your communities are, and your governments are struggling to figure this COVID-19 process. Many of them have never done Zoom council meetings. So they're learning that. And sometimes the Health and Human Services Department and all those frontline folks are doing a great job. They're driving the bus now, but it's going to be handed to us economic developers to re-engage, recover, and retool this economy. So we want to make sure that we, while they're driving that bus, the first phase that we did in the Valley is make sure that we communicate, support what they want in the Health and Human Service area, but then stay in communication. And then the second thing is we wanted to help the communities realize that these projects are not being delayed. The development agreements need to go. They've already gone out for bid on construction, especially in the Northwoods where we have a smaller construction time because of the snow. We really need to improve our communication. So Eric, the answer to that question is we had to reach out and communicate on both sides. We had to form task force to improve those communications with the planning and zoning and building inspectors to make them aware that just because we have a stay-at-home order, construction bids are still coming. The bulldozers are going to be starting in May, and we need to be in a position to have these documents approved. So building that team of communication is the first thing that we did. Now that
that's awesome. So I kind of want to transition into the talent wars, but I'm going to go ahead and put a poll up, which is your next topic, just to kind of get some feedback about the number of requests people are receiving now during this COVID crisis. But let's talk while we've put that poll up. It should be in your chat box. Go ahead and kind of put your responses in. But talent wars. I had the joy of joining Jeff Finkel at IADC earlier this year in Indianapolis, and that seemed like everything that we talked about was about the shortage of talent and the shortage of employees that really inhibited a lot of communities for business attraction. Talk to me about your viewpoints on the talent wars, and is that over, or is there a new rethinking?
Well, let's definitely say in an optimistic way, things are going to change. Companies are going to, they've experimented with work at home, so they know how that's going to work. So they're going to make some decisions on whether they can outsource or continue to do that. The second thing, the talent, we know in the large density areas like Milwaukee, New York, Detroit, that density, that number of people creates a risk. So I think companies for the smaller rural areas that, especially as we see a reshoring and essential manufacturing and that movement to never be held hostage again, that might be a competitive advantage for some of these rural areas that are geographically isolated. So I think the war for talent might balance out on one, we've experimented with this, we're going to cut costs, we're going to save, we've learned to do some adaptation. Those are some good things that this virus has allowed these manufacturers and these businesses to do. Maybe I'm not going to recall all these people back, so that will give me a pool of labor. That's one advantage. Two, those rural communities might have a competitive advantage because of their geographic isolation or density, less dense population. And it's going to be interesting to see, as an optimist, how the manufacturing and social distancing kicks in, how companies are learning to deal with that. So I think, honestly, the war for talent, and that might be over. There's speculation that now it's going to be, we might even go into, there's some experts that say wage deflation. We'll take a lower wage to be in a safer environment, to be in a safer community. Those are things that we can look down the road at in recovery and retooling. So yeah, I think that the talent war for people might be over because it's going to be everybody going to be grabbing the high-end talent. It's going to be those folks that the companies have adjusted to and said, hey, we might not need this many people. We've learned through this month and a half of COVID-19. We were a little bit we had a lot of fat on the bone, and we can do some things in efficiency more innovatively. Eric, that also goes in the manufacturing world. My area is 21% manufacturing GDP, so they're learning a lot of things on how to do some things more efficiency, more lean. So I think that's going to add cutting some fat from the bone, and that might give some opportunities. But from my feedback of the normative conversations, I think the war for talent is going to be over.
Good. And I think that's going to provide a lot of opportunities for businesses to really hone in and to work on developing their cities in a new way. Now, talk about business retention requests, and this is something I've always been kind of thinking to myself. And on the poll that we just took, seems like it's heavily weighted towards a 10 to 25, not heavily weighted, but 10 to 25 requests. 40% of the communities out there that took the poll have said they get an average of 10 to 25 requests per week from their local companies. Would you say that's a high number or a low number in terms of ability to handle and work with those individual companies and to satisfy?
Well, that's going to be, I think, what Mike and the other guests have talked about. Resources for the economic development organizations are going to be stretched, and companies are going to enter a cost savings mode, so they're not going to be spending as much in the next couple of months, try to recoup the cost, the money that they lost. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies are calling, asking with the SBA, all the PPE programs, how can you help? So we set up a task force of our bankers that would help help with those applications. Those applications are going to trickle down. As you know, the SBA is taking the self-employed, the self-entrepreneur applications now. About May, that's going to all trickle down and kind of be solved. But the workload, I think, is only going to begin in the retooling aspect. We're probably seeing on the service sector side some companies that aren't going to ever be able to reduce. And then how, let's give you an example, Eric. Let's talk about the dentist, okay? Just hypothetically, how do they get retooled? We know dentists that in the first phase, they gave their PPE to hospitals. So how are they going to replenish some of their product if there's such a backload of PPE? They can't get into operation. I'm speaking to a couple of them. They can't get operational until they can get their raw materials in that they gave away and supported the virus. So they're 45, 60 days out, and that's not going to be full blown. So yeah, the number of 10 to 25, I'm getting those requests a week for the application assistance. Now when we go into the retooling, and that's a good point, Eric, what's going to happen? I don't like the word social distancing. That's placed at physical distancing. How are the manufacturers going to implement a physical distancing on the production line? Okay, those are the questions we're starting to get. When the workers return to work, their expectation of safety are going to be really more heightened. How can those businesses implement some of that? Where are they going to go? The whole dynamics of manufacturing might be changed in that. And so we're seeing a movement from, I'd call a panic of we need help with application financing assistance, moving into, okay, let's retool. How do we do this? What's the future going to look like? How do we handle our shifts? Putting in from the first shift coming into the second shift, staggering the 20 minutes so they don't run into each other. Where it used to be a social gathering in between shifts, they've eliminated that. So there's a lot of things that we've got from those requests. And I think that the business community is going to have to realize they're going to need some expertise and to look for the economic development organizations and the chambers to do that. But at the same time, they're in the cost-cutting mode. They got to be tightening their belt. And that's going to be a double-edged sword for some of us that don't have flush budgets. And we're going to have even more re-engage and have those communications. And I hope that answered your question.
No, those are great points, and some you don't normally think about till you get behind the lines and see how these businesses are thinking and what the troubles are that they have to put up with on a daily basis. Charlie, thank you so much. I'm going to put you on hold also, and we'll get to our final speaker. And as always, Charlie, it's a pleasure, and hope we have some good questions for you. All right. Our final speaker today is Jeff Finkel. And Jeff, are you on here?
I hopefully am.
All right. Let's turn this back on for you. All right. So Jeff is the president of IEDC. I've known Jeff, and it seems like it's kind of scary. I'm dating myself, but everything's 20 plus years ago. I met Jeff a long time ago. We actually played golf in Canada, and we actually won it. And it was not with a pencil eraser; it was a real win out on the golf course. But we had a lot of fun, and we've always enjoyed what IEDC does for the economic development community. And you've actually appeared and become famous on CBS Morning News or Sunday Morning. You've been on Fox Television. You've been on PBS with the Journal Report. You've really stepped outside and made a name, not just for yourself, but for the economic development community. And I think that's very important for companies around the country to know that you guys are a valuable resource, and cities have people in place that you guys help train to be better and help those companies. Talk a little bit about yourself, or give us a little background on you, and then I want to dive right in about some of the things you guys are doing.
Well, talking about me isn't a very long story anymore. I've been in this job 34 years. IEDC merged between the American Economic Development Council and the Council for Urban Economic Development 19 years ago. We, in fact, it was May the 8th, 2001. I was the president of the Council for Urban Economic Development before that. So effectively, I've had the same job for 34 years. Are you there?
Hello. Sorry about that. I'm here.
Yeah, I was done telling about my background.
Okay, sorry about that. I hit it on mute. Brooke came in and asked me a question, so I tried to answer it real quick. But yeah, let's talk about, because I've really enjoyed, and I've been on your webinar series and listening to communities do exactly what we're doing here is sharing it and talking about what they're doing. And you're coming up with more webinars. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, we started our webinar series on March 23rd, and this is a free webinar series, and it's about how to deal. What are the resources that may be available to communities, or how do you approach economic recovery as we end up getting through this coronavirus, COVID-19, however you want to refer to it. And by the way, and I know that you were going to give a plug at the end on restoreyoureconomy.org, but if you go to that website, you can download all of the previous webinars that we've had. In fact, Brett Downey, whose name I saw in this list, was one of our speakers. I believe he was in our second webinar. Paul Saldana, who I also saw in this list, he was actively involved in one of them as providing information to people. But we've had a whole series of them. We've had Richard Florida, the urbanist professor up at the University of Toronto, talked about what 10 steps that it would take to get cities back up and running. We had people from Toronto and Galveston and Los Angeles County talking about how they have addressed issues. And in the case of Toronto, they had the previous issue of SARS and what damage that did to their community. The next one's coming up, and I won't say that one of them is more important than any of them. On April the 20th, the Community Development Block Grant Program is getting $5 billion. How do we use that $5 billion not only for community development, but for economic development? And how do we relieve some of the pain and suffering that people in our communities are going through using that CDBG dollars? In many cases, our members are not responsible for distributing that money, but we can certainly have a lot of influence. I would think if somebody is sitting around saying, how do we build that road with CDBG dollars, they're already off the mark. We need to get that money on the streets as quickly as possible. We need to think about sheltering people, feeding people, putting construction workers back to work as soon as possible. If we can't spend that $5 billion within the next 18 months, then we've wasted that money, in my opinion. So that's one of the things that's going to be talked about on April 20th. And April 27th, we're going to have an international panel. How are they handling this issue in Calgary? How are they handling the issue in Quebec, in Mexico, some of the major cities in the world? And we have a whole series of speakers that are going to be sharing the practice that they're going through in terms of responding to the recovery as the coronavirus. Most of our webinars are on Mondays, but we also have one coming up on April the 30th. And on April the 30th, we have three PhD economists. Dr. Susan Helper from Case Western Reserve. She was the chief economist at the Department of Commerce. She's going to be talking about effectively is now an opportunity to reshore jobs. We've got Chris Chimura. Many people know her from Richmond, Virginia. She's going to lay out, how bad are things across the country right now. And we've got Dr. Betsy Stevenson. Dr. Stevenson, you have probably seen quoted quite a bit lately, and she's going to talk about what's it going to take to reopen our communities for jobs. And this is all going to be moderated by Rod Miller, the head of Invest Puerto Rico. On May the 4th, we're going to have a bunch of people discussing how do you fund these economic development organizations during these particular times. And so those are what we've got up to this point. No,
and I've been on them. They're really good and well put together. And putting this one together. I really respect what you're doing, and so you're doing a tremendous job there. And in those, you've been able to talk to thousands of communities and really kind of be a sounding board for them. So, what would you say? Where do these communities, where are they needing the most help? And I just posted a poll up on our chat box that people can kind of respond to. But where do you see through these communications where they need the most help?
Well, you asked it as 3 must-dos for cities to stay ahead, and that's how I'm going to answer it. First, and I'm going to return people back to restoreyoureconomy.org. There is a book on there that is free for downloading called Leadership in the Times of Crisis. And I would encourage everybody to take a peek at that. It was not written with a pandemic in mind, but many of the things that we've learned at working on recovery after disasters is dealt with. The 3 things that I would suggest people pay attention to is 1, communication. I heard Linda Demario, who happens to be one of my members of the IEDC board, talk about how she's communicating with her business community. I think what we've learned in every disaster is that communication is essential. What can you do for your business community? What can you not do for your business community? Where are the resources that are available? Also on Restore Your Economy, we've essentially given folks an opportunity to pick and choose what are kind of the best practices and websites in terms of responding to COVID. And we've looked at dozens, if not hundreds of websites, and we've shown folks what are the things they might want to think about picking and choosing. Second, the question that the last speaker was talking about is, or maybe it was the second speaker, is where are you going to find money to fund your economic development organization? And you have a staff that report to you. How are you going to pay them? You've got businesses that are going to be needing assistance. How are you going to do it? So I think being on the call on Monday, there may be CDBG money that you can tap into to supplement maybe a declining funding base for your economic development organization. The Economic Development Administration is getting $1.5 billion. Is there a chance that you can get some EDA funds to support your economic development organization? We're going to have Dennis Alvarez from EDA speaking a little later in May. We're actually lobbying to try to get them an additional $1 billion. On top of, we're also trying to lobby to get the 501c6s eligible for the PPP. I don't know how successful we'll be with that. Cities and states, while they're hurting right now, there's about $400 billion going out from the CARES Act for cities. So many communities may in fact get some additional money that hopefully can help the economic development organizations thrive. And then finally, and maybe as important as anything, we're not going to be able to do much economic development right now. But once we're past the and can start to return to work, what is your plan for helping the businesses that are struggling? Now is the time to build that strategic plan or upgrade your strategic plan so that you come out of the box running.
Yeah, that's great. And the poll that we just are taking it's live, and it's kind of echoing what you're talking about in terms of communication is a really strength of responding to these local businesses. You kind of dove into the next topic, in terms of the must-dos, and kind of talk to that a little bit. If you're going to put your finger on one thing, I love that you just talked about planning, for the businesses that are struggling. Is there anything else you think that's a must-do for these cities?
Well, I think I covered the 3 must-dos: communication, protecting your own staff, and and dealing with the planning aspects.
Okay.
I think maybe going on to the last point is when can we get back to work? And one of the reasons we're having the April 30th webinar is we particularly want to hear to Betsy Stevenson, who's this economist at Michigan. I've been spending a lot of time focused on that issue. And one of the things that all of the economists and the public health people say is we're going to be able to successfully go back to work when our public health system has the ability to test literally millions of people every day, and that we can really narrow down who has this virus and who doesn't, quarantine those that have it, figure out who's already had it, essentially give them a green light to interact with the rest of the world. But here's the bad news. The bad news is we had 30% less tests this week than we had last week. And part of it is that we don't have some of the essential components for testing. Until we get that resolved, that's going to be a real problem for letting a lot of people back to work. So we've got to get that problem resolved. I just got a notice from the state of Utah a little bit ago. They are putting a ton of effort into testing so that they know that they can successfully send people back to work, isolate hot pockets of viruses, and that they can do thousands and thousands of tests every day. Once we've got that testing regime in place, then we can treat, we send people either to quarantine or to the hospital, and we then can just wait until we get a vaccine and get by this thing completely. But testing is the key. We can go back to work too quickly, and what we learned in Toronto from SARS is we end up having to shut everything down again, and that wouldn't be any good.
No, not at all. So kind of talk to us. I'm going to try to go over and bring up your restoreyoureconomy.com or .org and talk about some of the resources that communities can find on there that'll help them manage their day-to-day operations.
Well, there is a ton of things on restoreyoureconomy.org, from how to set up a loan program for during a disaster. There's a fair amount of information about what Galveston already has before they ever head into a disaster. As I said a little bit ago, kind of the ingredients for an upgraded website to assist communities around a virus, leadership in the times of crisis, all of the other prior webinars that we've had, the link to upcoming webinars, and these are all free. IEDC has two types of webinars. It has ones that you pay for, but we still will have some of those during this time period. But we're also doing this free series for everybody because we're all in this together, as everybody says. And then there's a lot of case studies about specific things we've learned. We've actually gone through most of the states and found out what they're doing as of a week and a half ago. We put a ton of effort in very quickly. So, but thank you very much for having me on here today. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, and I've got the restoreyoureconomy.org up, and you can also see there's some templates that you can use for building a COVID page if you haven't been able to put that together. There's a ton of resources on there for you. So with that said, thank you, Jeff. I always appreciate your knowledge and your time that you've spent with the entire economic development community. And we are going to open it up now to Q&A. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, if they're directed to a particular person, please direct it to that person. We'll try to bring them on mic and get your questions answered, or we'll just open it up for someone to ask. And if we don't have any questions, we'll work hard on putting everything that you've put in the chat boxes together for you that you can use for resources. We had a question earlier from, but this was from Jody Krantz. She was asking actually one of the chat responses in there on how to fund the loan programs.
If I were funding a loan program, Eric, I would apply to EDA. They're going to actually be probably with their 1.5 billion, they're going to be putting a fair amount of money into revolving loan funds that exist around the country. You may be able to ask them to stand up a revolving loan fund. $5 billion in CDBG funds. You probably are going to have to limit any lending out of that or any granting to low and moderate income neighborhoods. But that money will exist as well. And then I would not give up on assisting companies either applying for a PPP or an EIDL loan from the Small Business Administration.
It's great. That is it's very helpful, and that seems to be a challenge by most. And Linda kind of tapped into that, not just from a company standpoint. Jeff, do you feel that you've kind of talked about this, but do you foresee some federal funds coming in, being available to the cities specifically for COVID response? Whether or not I've talked to some people about hiring, accountants to help people fill out their paperwork or manage those types of items. Do you see any additional dollars other than some of the resources that you've mentioned?
So as you know, Congress passed $2.1 trillion. I'm stunned by the numbers that we're talking about these days, but $400 billion of that is going into state and local government assistance in some fashion or another. How those communities are going to spend that money is anybody's guess. Communities of 500,000 or more will get a direct grant from the federal government. Those under 500,000 are going to have to work with their state government to get it. But let me give you a statistic that was sent to me by the Small Business Administration today. Of the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP, they have guaranteed 1,035,000 loans through the end of the day yesterday. So that money is getting out there. IEDC is a 501c3. And we are eligible for a PPP. We applied last week and our loan was funded this morning. So it is moving quickly. We were lucky. I have a good accountant who put together the application, and we had a good banker who drove it through for us. But we have the money in our account as of this morning.
Wow. No, that's quick. That's phenomenal. That's great, guys. Jeff, if you have anything else you'd like to add, it looks like we can wrap this up. I want to kind of give contact information. People might have questions after this, or if they watch this in the replay, it can also accept questions for us. Any other nuggets of information you'd like to share?
I was having problems. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
No, we're available every Monday at 3 p.m. We're going to continue this COVID series. I will be not speaking in any of them, but anybody who wants to ask a question, I'm typically behind the curtain helping to answer. So feel free to bring any question any Monday to one of IEDC's webinars.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. So I'm going to wrap this up for today. For those that have any additional questions, you can direct those. And I want to kind of just let everybody know we've adopted some programs ourselves through AI technology. That is to help communities in their response efforts. And we do a lot of other types of programs. We're here for you. Brooke has put together a survey or response that will follow up post this webinar. So look for your emails, and we're going to put together all of these responses. There's a ton of good information in the chat box. We'll download that, we'll organize it, and we will post it up on our website. But feel free to send me any of your questions. My email is on the screen. It's eric@gslisolutions.com. And Brooke, our marketing director, does a phenomenal job. And it's probably best to filter things through her before me. Her and Caresta here organize my days and responses. But she is at brooke@gslisolutions.com. And our websites, you can view all of our available projects that are that have expansions in place at gsliprojectportal.com. And of course, we'd love to see you visit globaltrademag.com. So with no further ado, I want to thank everybody for coming today, and all of our guests. Really appreciate the information, the time and energy you put to share that with our visitors today. So till we see you again, I'm going to sign off and thank everybody. Stay safe and keep in touch.